Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't know a quiet airport terminal could feel like a siren. O'Hare's Terminal 5 was stripped of music and advertising loops. The restaurants shuttered with metal grates, the monitors frozen on red-lined cancellations. But the lighting hummed. The air handlers roared. The PA coughed static and then fell silent again. Every sound felt like a warning that hadn't learned the right words. I'm a senior flight attendant with 22 years on long-haul routes. Chicago to Tokyo, Dallas to Frankfurt, the polar shelf nights where the sky looks like it's holding in a breath. I've handled medical events at FL 380, unaccompanied minors in tears, diversions for smoke alarms that turned out to be steam from a coffee maker. You think you've seen enough to hit a ranking on the unusual things list? Then you live through a week like this one, where the caution tape goes up overnight on a world you thought was stable, and your airline calls you in for a flight that isn't on the schedule. We met in a closed gate area. 30 of us at first. Me, 4 other flight attendants pulled from reserve, 2 lead agents, and a pair of airport police. Our captain came from the crew lounge, still carrying his overnight bag and a folder with a printout clipped in the corner like a school project. He's the kind of captain who makes every announcement sound like a neighbor telling you the weather and what it means for your driveway. First officer looked younger than my nephew, but had the calm posture of someone long familiar with checklists. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, resting his bag against a row of seats, "we've been asked to operate an unscheduled flight at the request of state. We're using the 777-200 ER that came in last night from San Francisco. Fuel will be topped to max structural. We'll be entering an emergency corridor eastbound and we'll be on our own for a stretch. No diversions have been accepting. The latest word is that might change by the time we get to our equal time points, but plan as though it won't." He passed around the printed sheet. The top line read, "Charter US DOS EMB Staff Evac." The destination field was just 5 letters, TBAIELND. "Island?" I asked. "Working options," he said. "Dispatch says we likely have one realistic landing site that's reachable if winds are favorable. But weather has been below their approach minimums for most of the last 12 hours. If they get their equipment up, we'll have a shot." I've learned over the years how to translate cockpit language into cabin reality. Shot meant we might be circling over iced-over water in the dark, hoping that the numbers slide our way. The lead agent, Jen, briefed us on the passenger mix. "You'll see 2 types," she said. "Half our embassy staff, American and from a couple partners, with travel orders in hand and curated packing. The other half is evacuees, the last seats we could clear from the list. We had to lock the gate to manage the crowd earlier. The manifest won't exactly match the faces. IDs might be passports, or it might be letters from consulates. Expect kids, expect a few elderly, expect some who had to run." "Bags?" I asked. "Everyone gets one, that's the rule. But some will test it. Keep overheads tight, you'll need aisle space." Security officers filled in the gaps I didn't want to imagine. The terminal had seen 2 separate incidents that morning. The words were clinical. An altercation, a medical collapse. I knew enough not to ask for scenes or adjectives. I had slept the previous afternoon with the TV off and woke up with a headache from too much quiet. We headed for the jet bridge. The 777 felt like a familiar ocean liner waiting for a storm. The cleaners had done what they could. The carpet looked vacuumed, the galleys reset. The aft galley smelled like citrus disinfectant and stainless steel. I checked the door-girt bars, slide pressure gauges all in the green, rafts in the ceiling compartments latched and placarded. We double-checked the emergency equipment cabinets. Portable oxygen bottles in the green, masks coiled, AED where it belonged, EMK sealed, EEMK sealed, restraint kit intact. I skimmed the cabin log. A reading light in 34C was INOP. A tray table latch in row 7 had been taped during the last turnaround. Nothing that would keep us from a departure. FAP is showing all zones normal, Danielle, my purser today, said at the front attendant panel. Cabin temp set for 23 Celsius. Lights stand by and full bright for boarding. We'll go sterile early. The captain came aboard with our loadmaster and the mechanic on duty. A 673XX is our bird, he told me at L1. Dispatch filed us north of typical to get around some discontinuities in the corridor. ER ops only to an island option that will brief you after takeoff. We've added contingency and final reserves to the legal minimums. If winds don't violate the forecast by more than 10 knots, the numbers make sense. It was the most honest comfort I'd get all day. Boarding started quiet and stayed that way except for the sound of wheels. Embassy staff moved like people who'd rehearsed packing for days like this. Evacuees came with hard eyes and a set of bags that had obviously gone through sorting in hallways and bus queues. There were families. A baby with a knitted hat with ears. A teenage boy with a varsity jacket who kept his gaze fixed out the windows. A woman alone in business attire, hair pulled back so tightly stretched the skin at her scalp. An older couple with yellowed paper envelopes clasped carefully. At row 22, a man paused and closed his eyes. Maybe early 50s, pale, damp at the temples despite the cool air. He was with a woman I assumed was his niece from their body language, close but not spousal, worried but letting him make his own choices. She held a white pharmacy bag and kept checking a prescription label with her thumb smoothing it over and over. I approached them. "Afternoon," I said, imagining normality. "Row 22 is on your left. You're in the center section." The woman lifted the pharmacy bag. "He's running a fever," she said. "We were told by the agent that if we had any symptoms, we should disclose before boarding." I looked at the man's face. His pupils were tight, breathing shallow. He had that sheen people get when they're trying to stay composed and their body isn't interested in the plan. "Sir," I said gently, "do you feel steady?" "Just tired," he said. "We walked a lot." "We have a physician aboard," I said. "Let me seat you, and I'll ask them to come have a look." The physician was easy to identify. Tall, hair silver at the sides, wearing a polo with the hospital emblem that had been on local news the last week. His name was Dr. James Amiri. He'd come straight from an emergency department shift to the airport, the lead agent whispered, the stethoscope in his carry-on still wrapped in thin plastic. He took one look at the man's breathing and asked to move them to a row with more space. We reseated them near 22 so we could monitor without creating a spectacle. The doctor asked for water, rested a hand on the man's wrist, checked his watch, then asked the niece specific, calm questions. No cough reported. No travel beyond home and work in the last 2 weeks. Fever climate for a day. Confusion earlier that morning. He asked whether there had been any exposure to the events at the station 2 days ago. She shook her head with clean certainty. He gave acetaminophen from his kit and recommended hydration, rest, and observation. He lifted his eyes to me where the man couldn't see and I could read the cautious uncertainty there. We've all learned new tells for stark words in the last few days. We completed boarding with the cadence of a drill. I ran the safety checks with the rest of the team. Galley carts latched, brakes on. Oven doors locked, movable barriers stowed, closets latched, wheelchair kit present, lavatories serviced and clear. I walked the aisles with water bottles. People drank like it was a test that had a right answer. At pushback, the jet bridge pulled away with a squeal that echoed. We went through the demo in full, not the short version. I made my voice as steady and friendly as I knew how for the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We appreciate your patience and cooperation today. Please give your full attention to the safety demonstration. Some of this may be familiar, but it's essential for everyone aboard to know, today especially. Hands moved in a ripple as belts clicked. Eyes watched the nearest exits with a focus I rarely saw outside turbulence. We rolled for takeoff into a sky that had sagged gray over the lake. Climb-out was direct and brisk as dispatch had arranged, the runway edge lights flashing an orderly retreat under the nose. When the main gear thumped into the wells, the cabin let out a sound that wasn't quite a cheer and wasn't quite a sigh. One of those communal breaths people take when they've agreed to try something hard together. Flight level 3, 50. The altimeters clicked. We settled into cruise. The 777 has a steady way of holding the air, like a hand on your shoulder when streets feel icy. The captain came on with a short update. Folks, thanks for being with us. We'll be making good time. We're in contact with ATC via data link, and we're on a cleared corridor with other eastbound traffic. We do anticipate some bumps. Please keep those seatbelts fastened when you're in your seat. He didn't say it, but he meant, we're talking to the ground in short bursts because the frequencies are saturated with unusual calls, but we still have routes and we still have numbers. Cabin service plan, water, shelf-stable snacks while supplies lasted, and hot coffee if the packs behaved. We'd been advised not to serve a full meal service to keep aisles clear and reduce time people were unmasked or not at their seats. We split the cabin into halves. Amanda and I took forward economy in the front galley. Danielle and Luis worked mid-cabin. Chris took aft with a jump down to help when needed. 2 hours in, the physician pressed the call light. I was close and reached him in seconds. The man from row 22, his name was Daniel, the niece is Eva, was slumped sideways, breathing shallow with intermittent jerks. I need space, Dr. Miri said in that voice I've heard so many times from professionals who are trying to keep their words light enough not to scare people and heavy enough to make things happen. Please get me the AED, oxygen, and the emergency medical kit. I tapped my interphone to tell Danielle we had a medical. She rolled the AED up in seconds, the red case bumping softly against seat legs. I brought the portable O2 bottle and the 2 kits. We moved Daniel into the center section where an empty row had mercifully stayed empty. Passengers watched with the particular stillness you get at altitude when something breaks the normal arc of a flight. The physician took a quick set of vitals, tore the AED pads open and asked me to hold his watch's timer. He started compressions hard and counted under his breath. He seized, Ava said, voice thin and flat. Then he went quiet. We followed the protocol written into muscle memory. Clear, analyze. Shock advised, no. Continue compressions. Ventilate. Time check. Rotate. The AED told us the story we didn't want to hear. After a long, exhausting stretch that felt both quick and endless, after doing everything the manual, the law, and human decency asks you to do, the doctor looked at me and gave a small nod. He turned to Ava, put his hand gently on her shoulder, and told her the truth with simple words. She didn't scream. She folded into herself. A small contained collapse like a paper cup buckling. We secured Daniel with belts in row 22. We used the curtain screens to give some privacy. It felt both insufficient and necessary. The captain, when told, asked for everything we could give him. Time of onset, time of cessation, vital changes, any possible exposure. He contacted MedLink over SATCOM and data linked that we'd had an in-flight death, cause unknown, with fever prior to takeoff. 3 hours later, the aircraft hit a line of chop like a stairway we didn't see coming. I had just finished a water pass when the interphone chimed. "Amanda 2 forward," Danielle said, her voice controlled and tight. I jogged up the aisle and saw 2 men standing in the forward galley, both of them embassy staff from their lanyards. One wanted to call his family on the sat phone. The other wanted to help because he had security training. People were starting to stand, the tension like a smell. The cabin had shifted from resigned to hungry for answers. The captain came on with a brief. "We are evaluating our options for diversion. Many fields are not accepting at this time. We have to manage fuel carefully. Please remain seated. We'll update you as we know more." Breathing in a cabin goes through phases when people are afraid. It can get shallow and fast, then quiet, as if holding fear in a pocket is safer than letting it out. I moved back down the aisle to check on row 22. That was when Daniel moved. It was small at first. A twitch that looked like turbulence had joggled him. I've seen post-event muscle reflexes. Airline crews are taught to expect them sometimes. But this was different. His neck flexed slowly. His fingers tightened around the airline blanket, then loosened, then tightened again like someone practicing the motion. His lips parted and closed. I felt the hair on my arms rise when his head turned slightly toward the aisle with a slow, intent movement. "Doctor," I said, and my voice wasn't quite steady. "Row 22. He was with me in seconds. He knelt, put 2 fingers on the carotid area, and frowned with a focus that said he was rechecking everything he knew to be true. "He has no pulse," he said quietly. "No respiratory effort that's effective. This is muscular activity." He looked in the eyes. "This isn't the first report I've heard of this," he added, voice lower still. "In the department this morning, we saw 2 cases where we thought we had an uncomplicated loss, and then movement began again without circulation. We don't fully understand the mechanism. The guidance we've been given is to secure and isolate if the body shows movement." Statistics are comforting until you have to act on what they mean. I asked Eva to move 3 rows forward with me. She looked like she was made of cold metal. She nodded once and stood, hands shaking, and I took her gently past people who kept their eyes wide and flat. We secured the belt in 22 over Daniel's shoulders and thighs, then added 2 spare belts through the seat tracks to create a restraint pattern that would hold. The physician improvised wrist ties with soft ties from the restraint kit and tore a blanket into strips to pad everything. We kept human dignity as best we could while keeping everyone else safe. It was like building a tiny fort around a truth we could not change. The interphone chirped again. "Flight deck," I said, plugging the cord in. The captain's voice was made smaller by the tiny speaker but not reduced in clarity. "Amanda, I'm sorry to ask this. We're crossing our equal time point in 25 minutes. We're being told that no diversion is accepting. Our best option is the island we told you about. Lajes in the Azores is a possibility. Weather's below their published ILS minimums right now. There's also Ponta Delgada. Similar issues. Gander isn't taking. Keflavik is rejecting all non-military. Shannon didn't answer the SATCOM call. Dispatch is asking us to continue and conserve." "Understood," I said. And I did, even if my stomach didn't. "Cabin remains manageable. We have 1 secured in 22. We'll keep witness notes and update." The physician came to the forward galley. "We need to plan for further movement," he said. "If he frees an arm and reaches, we need to keep a barrier between him and anyone else, especially if we hit more turbulence." "Galley carts," I said immediately. "We can park 2 side by side in the aisle at row 21 on max break. We can add the service bars across and run belts to the seat legs. That gives us a barrier and a place to anchor. We'll use blankets as pads on the cart edges." "Good," he said. "Also, You'll want to think about protecting your forearms. Thick plastic from carry-on shells with a blanket underneath will give you something if you need to interpose your arm between someone and contact. We weren't going to broadcast those words to the whole cabin on a PA, but we did need to organize the able-bodied quietly. I walked the rows with a soft, low voice. "I'm going to ask for volunteers to help with some aisle barriers," I said. "If you're comfortable using your strength to hold a cart brake and you're steady under stress, please meet me at row 20. If you have a hardshell carry-on, I might ask to borrow a panel of it." You learn a lot about people when you make that ask at 35,000 feet. A man who had been silent for 2 hours and wore a suit that probably cost a quarter of my annual shoes budget stood up immediately and said, "Tell me where." A young woman in a hoodie rolled up her sleeves to reveal climber's forearms and nodded. The security-trained embassy staffer who'd wanted to help earlier came back with the stance of a person who'd had orders most of his adult life and missed them. We built quietly. We moved 2 carts together just aft of the curtain, brakes set, wheels chalked with meal trays wrapped in bar towels, straps run low and high to the seat legs. We showed the volunteers how to stand, 1 foot staggered, knees soft, hands flat on the cart corners, eyes on me for signals. We distributed 3 makeshift forearm guards, hardshell carry-on panels lined with folded blankets and held with duct tape from the galley. Not armor, but better than nothing. I assigned 2 volunteers to each of the forward lav doors as sentries, not to deny the lav, but to make sure only 1 person was up at a time, and that if anyone showed that waxy, unfocused look we'd started to learn, we'd usher them to seats and ask the doctor to assess. The first real test came when the aircraft hit a wave of turbulence that shook the bins hard enough to rattle latches. People gasped. Seatbelt signs had been on for an hour, but a man in 4D stood to grab his backpack from the overhead despite the alert chime and my hand signal. The cart volunteers held steady. We rode the vibration like a train on uneven track. The cabin always feels smaller in those moments, the ceiling coming down perceptibly, the aisle narrowing. The lights flickered and came back steady. We briefed very low, very calm. If you must stand, sit back down. If you need water, press the call light. We will come to you. Most people listened. There are always a few who test the edges. The difference today was that the edges felt like cliffs. An hour past the ETP, the captain called again. "We have updated weather," he said. "Layez reporting ceiling 100 feet variable, runway lights at low intensity due to power issues, rescue and firefighting personnel at minimal. Ponta Delgada reporting close to the same. The approach minimums for our category require more than what's reported. We cannot plan to descend below decision altitude without visual references. We'll try to buy time. We're going to slow down a hair to extend endurance in case we get a rise in ceiling." "Understood," I said. "Cabin is secure." The physician squeezed my arm lightly as I hung up. "You're doing good work," he said. "Do you think I can say that on the PA?" I asked, trying to smile. "Maybe save it for the ground," he said, smiling back in a way that didn't patronize me. Row 22 moved again. This time, the motion was unmistakable intent. Daniel's head turned, jaw working slowly like someone thinking hard through gum. His eyes had a dry gleam. His mouth opened. A sound came out, not a word, not a breath, something in between. He pulled against the restraints. The seat creaked. The belts held because we'd layered them. I gave a small, clear hand signal toward the cart volunteers. They leaned their weight into the brakes and braced. Eva had asked to stay nearby, 3 rows forward and across the aisle where she could see but not be within reach. She whispered something I didn't quite catch, maybe his name, or the words people say when what's happening refuses to fit into the past tense. I stayed with her for a few seconds, then turned my attention back to containment. The doctor kept a meter of distance and watched the movement, his face playing through a page of calculations he could not check with the lab. "This could go on intermittently," he said quietly to me. "We need to assume we'll have bursts of agitation." "Bathrooms?" I asked. "What's the plan if agitation happens in a lab?" "Preempt," he said. "Keep those short and monitored. If someone looks compromised, they should not go alone. If someone becomes confused, you need them seated and restrained in a way that protects others and themselves. Use soft ties first. If you need to escalate to restraint cuffs, you'll need 2 to 3 strong volunteers per limb just to do it safely without causing harm." We looked at our cabin. We made eye contact with our volunteers and nodded. We were not doing a security demo on a PA. We were giving the people a chance to rise to a moment they didn't buy a ticket for. The cockpit sent an ACARS printout to the forward galley. The blocky dot matrix font spelled out fuel numbers and whens and the cryptic shorthand of pilots talking to a machine that is also a person they trust. I traced the line with a finger. If our winds held within 10 knots of forecast, we had the profile for one attempt and maybe a hold of 10 minutes at the island, no more. We'd briefed ditching procedures, recurrent training, twice a year. I knew the numbers for slide, raft capacity, and the locations of the ELTs by heart. But this wasn't an exercise with a mock-up. This was a dark runway maybe 40 minutes away, and an unknown number of people on the ground to point us in. The physician asked for a team of volunteers to help if we had to move someone quickly. I picked them like a sports team. The climber woman, the embassy staffer with the steady eyes, the suited man whose adrenaline had resolved into useful focus, a college-age kid who'd been helping his grandmother drink water with hands that didn't shake, a parent who had a firm, kind voice with their kids and lace-tight sneakers that told me they could plant themselves when needed. I gave them quick, simple instructions: hands placement, how to avoid hurting wrists, how to keep someone from biting without using your own fingers, how to slide someone sideways into 2 rows if needed to buy a moment. We had a second incident 20 rows aft. A passenger in 45A stood unsteady and started talking and rasping half-words that didn't connect to the language his wife said he spoke. His movements were jerky and then too smooth, as if he was trying to remember how doors worked. Chris reached him before I did. He spoke in soft, repetitive cues. "Sit here, please. Feet down. Good. Hands here." He guided him into a seat, and Luis brought soft ties. The man's wife cried quietly into a cloth napkin, thanking us while saying she was sorry over and over in a loop I've heard in waiting rooms and on sidewalks after car doors stop moving. The captain. "We're approaching the top of descent." The tone of his voice had changed, an edge of urgency underlaid by an exhausted professionalism. "We are planning a shootout at Lajes. Runway lights may be low. We've declared a medical emergency to prioritize. The field reports their emergency trucks unmanned. Ground personnel limited. If we do not or cannot land there, our alternate is Ponta Delgada, but weather is similar. We will only have one attempt at each. If neither is possible, we continue along the corridor and manage fuel to final reserves. Cabin crew, prepare the cabin for landing. Passengers, ensure your belts are fastened, seats upright, windows open, tray tables stowed. If you have items on the floor, place them firmly under the seat in front of you." I picked up the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to ask for your complete attention. We're preparing the cabin for landing. Please follow all instructions exactly. This is important. If you are seated in an exit row, review the briefing card and be ready to act if asked. Parents, secure your children in their belts. If you have small infants, hold them firmly secured with the child restraint you brought. We will come through the cabin now to check. The most helpful thing you can do is sit still and listen." We did our checks fast and thorough. I fixed a misrouted shoulder belt on a teenage boy who wanted to look brave for his little sister. I tightened the lap belt on the businesswoman whose hands shook so badly she couldn't make the human grip and pull motion. I put extra water bottles into the seat pockets of the two volunteers at the carts, because dry mouths make people do impulsive things, and I needed their heads as clear as possible. I secured the galley latches with the heel of my hand until I felt the metal kiss shut. We armed doors. Doors to automatic and cross-check, I said, pressing the lever and checking the girt bar indicator for engagement. I imagined the sound slides make when they inflate, even though I'd only heard it in training bays and videos. I visualized the triangle of space we'd have at the L1 door if we had to open on our own without a command. Only on command, I thought, reciting the mantra that keeps chaos from snowballing. I picked up the interphone and called the cockpit. No answer. Just the small buzz of a line that hadn't been picked up. I tried again and left it in my hand, breathing slow so I wouldn't transmit fear over a silent wire. I looked down the length of the cabin. The cart volunteers were set. The physician met my eyes and nodded. Ready. Eva stared at row 22 with the expression of someone who has suspended every other thought except the shape of a person's name. The embassy staffers spoke in low voices to their teams, checking that they had identification and small things that mattered, once even if they didn't now. The aircraft descended. The sky outside the windows went from slate to ink. We broke through a cloud layer and then another. Somewhere out there was a runway and a set of runway and identifier lights and an approach light system that might be off or at low intensity because the island's power was unstable. I knew the checklists running in the cockpit without hearing them. Landing data set, approach brief complete, auto brakes set, spoilers armed, flaps at commanded degrees, landing gear down 3 green, cabin ready check received, except we hadn't given it yet because the interphone hadn't answered. The forward cabin shifted. A ripple in the first 10 rows. A whisper turned into a low sound like wind. The embassy staffer with security training stepped into the aisle, 3 steps back from the cart barricade, eyes on me for instructions. The physician stood near 22 but not within reach. The man in 45A made another of those unfinished sounds and then went still, head tilted. Turbulence bumped us in a way that felt personal. The bins rattled. The oxygen masks over row 8 chimed once in the compartment because a latch had never loved its job. I could feel the cabin pressurization change in my ears as we leveled at an intermediate altitude. The PA crackled and went silent. I tried the interphone a 3rd time. No answer. We were on a final I couldn't see. I thought of the light gun in the tower at my hometown airport. How controllers used colors when radios went out. No one here was going to flash us a green circle. It was night. If the runway lights came up, it would be a mercy. We might be looking at a black strip on oil between darker patches. I walked to L1 and put my hand on the door handle, feeling the metal cool under my palm. It wasn't time to touch it. But I needed to remind my muscles of what the shape felt like so I wouldn't fumble it if I ever had to move quickly. I looked back at the cabin. I checked every face I could in the seconds I had. The infant with the knitted hat was asleep, cheek pressed to their parent's shirt. The teenage boy squeezed his sister's hand in the exit row and gave her a nod that looked like an adult's promise. The suited man straightened his shoulders in a way that told me he'd figured out that his body posture could help strangers breathe slower just by being there. "Cabin lights to full bright," I said to Danielle. She touched the FAP and the overheads came up in a smooth surge. People blinked, then rallied their eyes forward. The interphone rang. I lifted it instantly. The call light showed cockpit. I said, "Forward," voice steady. No one spoke. The line carried only the hum of electronics and, behind that, something like wind over a microphone. I said, "Cabin ready, doors armed, cabin secured." I waited. The silence filled the small space at my ear like water. I set the handset gently back in its cradle. I looked at the L1 arming handle again, the silvery finish reflecting the cabin lights in a blurred line. I thought of the captain's voice telling me the numbers an hour ago, the first officer's steady confirmation calls on taxi, the weight of two people sharing a cockpit in a sky where rules had gone elastic. The carts held firm at row 21. The volunteer's hands were steady. The physician nodded once as if to say, "You know what you're doing. The runway might be there. It might not be." The choice in the cockpit was a choice I understood without being able to make it. "Brace position on my command," I said to the closest row in a calm tone, turning my head to include 3 rows with my eyes. "If I call it, you do it. For now, breathe and listen." I turned the front door's arming lever check window again, just to be certain the slide was still armed for an impact we might not be authorized to call. Then I stood at L1 facing the cabin, shoulders back, and I listened to the engine spool and the tires I couldn't see whisper in my imagination, and I waited for a voice that owed me nothing to tell me what came next. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.